Well, I thank God for you being here this morning because, as many of you know, well, first because you're here to worship God, but also we have a large contingent of our members that are on vacation up north. We missed them today. We'll miss many of them next Sunday as well. But thank you for being here because just by virtue of your attendance, you really help make up for that. So may God continue to bless all of you and bless our worship to Him. If you have a Bible and want to, would you turn to the book of 1 Kings, back in the Old Testament, 1 Kings, the 19th chapter. I have switched my sermon topics from what is indicated in the bulletin because of the events transpiring yesterday afternoon. I know most of you are aware of that. 1 Kings chapter 19, and I'll just read the first 4 verses. This event occurred just following what's kind of known as the Battle of the Gods on Mount Carmel, where Elijah, the prophet of God, showed Israel who the true God was. It was not Baal or any other false god. And in demonstrating that, or God actually demonstrating that by burning his sacrifice, and even more, 450 prophets of Baal who were begging, pleading, praying to their God to burn their sacrifice, and of course no God can do nothing, and that's exactly what happened, and they were put to death. And by the way, Jezebel, the queen at that time, she had those prophets in her pocket, and hearing that they'd been put to death did not make her very happy. All right, 1 Kings 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with a sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "Let the gods so do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them," in other words, dead, "by tomorrow about this time." And when he, Elijah, saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. Remember, he's trying to escape from the threat of Queen Jezebel, and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die, and said, "It is enough." As we would say, I'm done. "Now, Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." Did you know this is one of the most radical, emotional changes, plunges imaginable? In less than 24 hours, Elijah went from the soaring heights of spiritual victory to the deepest, darkest valley of despair. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Where one day something good happens, or maybe a lot of things, maybe everything happens so good, just right. And then within a matter of hours, or maybe the next day, all of a sudden it all just seems to collapse and you go right down emotionally. I've been there numerous times in my life. In fact, more times than I want to admit. But going back to Elijah, what do you suppose he was thinking as he was running? It's kind of like, well, what do I do now? He knew Jezebel, and he knew when she made a threat, she carried it out. So he's thinking, I mean, what do I do now? It's like, how's God going to work this out? Is everything going to be okay? You know, Elijah was not the only one who had such thoughts. Let's just look at other examples in the Bible. I want you to think about Abraham. Abraham likely wondered if everything was going to be okay on several occasions, but one is found in Genesis chapter 22. Genesis 22, verse 2, God orders Abraham to do something unthinkable. God had promised that he and Sarah would have a son, and through the son, all nations of the world would be blessed, and his descendants would be like the sands on the sea, the stars in the sky, And yet here's God's order for him. He says, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I shall tell you. Kill your son. And Abraham had to be thinking, this makes no sense. Why? Talk about being perplexed and wondering, how is this going to work out? I want you to think now about Joseph, the son of Jacob, at this point in time, the youngest. Genesis chapter 37. Jacob, his father, had sent Joseph to find out about the welfare of his older brothers, all of which didn't like it. A horrible mission. Now I'm reading from Genesis 37, 23 and 24. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they didn't embrace him, they didn't hug him. Hey brother, how you doing? No. They stripped Joseph of his tunic, that coat of many colors that his father had given him because he was the favorite son. The tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit. And that's probably a dry well. And probably more than just 6 or 8 feet deep, maybe 15 or more feet deep. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And what did he think? Okay, I came here to do my father a favor. And now I'm in a pit out of which there's no hope for escape. I mean, how is this going to work out? I mean, how? In fact, it gets worse. They finally pull him out of the pit to sell him to an Ishmaelite caravan going into Egypt. And he goes there, and he's sold as a slave. God blesses them, but then something else happens. You know, when it rains, it pours. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 20, Joseph refused the seductive advances of Potiphar, the one who purchased him, his wife. And so she accused him unjustly of attempting to rape her, that he was the aggressor there. And when Potiphar found out, he threw him into prison. Now he's in jail. And for such an offense, typically you spend the rest of your life in jail. So he thought, well, out of the pit, into the jail. I mean, how's that work? You know, all he's tried to do in his life is please God. How can he think everything's going to be okay at that point? Let's move on quickly. Think about Moses. Moses. In Exodus, the 14th chapter, after leading Israel out of Egypt, Pharaoh, who had more than willingly let the people go because of the 10 plagues, especially number 10, the death of the firstborn, he changes his mind, decided to pursue the Israelites all the way to the Red Sea, where they were, in essence, cornered there. Now I'm reading verses 10 and 11 from Exodus 14. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then, so they're begging for rescue, and apparently, since none seemed to be coming, then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us out of Egypt? This is all your fault. And what does Moses think? He sees the army of the Egyptians too, and it's formidable. They stand no chance, especially in the same camp with those who might fight among Israel. They have their women and their children and their animals and all that. And they're disorganized. They haven't even set up a organized possibility of defense. So he's thinking, how is this going to work out? Now I'm going to take your minds to a great character. The one who would succeed Moses as leader of Israel, Joshua. Now when we think of Joshua, I mean, he was a great, brave man, but he had some times too. Shortly after he and the Israelites crossed into Canaan and had this miraculous victory by the power of God over the city of Jericho, where God caused the victory, caused all the walls of the city to fall down, so all they had to do is run in and defeat the citizens of the city. Their next target, nearby city, Ai, was very, very small. I'm reading from Joshua chapter 7. Now begin at verse 2. In all of Joshua's life, nothing discouraged him as much as what you'll read here. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, obviously to check it out, recon mission, which is beside Beth Aven on the east side of Bethel, and spoke to them, saying, "Go up and spy out the country." So the men went up and spied out Ai. And they returned to Joshua and said to him, "Do not let all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men, just a fraction of their army, go up and attack Ai. Do not weary all the people there, because the people of Ai are few." In other words, they don't stand a chance. A couple thousand men? No problem. So about 3,000 men went up from there, from the people, but they fled. Literally, they ran for their lives before the men of Ai, the small city with a very small army. And the men of Ai, not only that, struck down about 36 men. The Israelites lost no one in the battle against Jericho, thanks to God. And you may say, well, 36 men is not a lot. Oh, for an army that's never lost a man, to the best of our knowledge. That's a big, big problem. For they chased them, that is the men of Ai, chasing the Israelite small army, from there before the gate as far as Shebarim, and struck them down on the descent. Therefore the hearts of the people, when they found out, melted and became like water. Then Joshua, and he understands none of this, tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until evening. He and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their heads. And Joshua's thinking, what is going on here? This is not according to plan. And I almost wonder if he, just for a moment, doubts God a little bit. Is everything going to be okay? Several more examples. Most of you know the example of Job, what happened to him after faithfully serving God all his life. Everything in one day was taken away. His children, everything he owned. He was the wealthiest man of the East. And then shortly thereafter, his health was taken away, afflicted horribly with boils, a horrendous disease. I won't read all that, but he has to be asking. In fact, he does ask, what happened? Why has God allowed this? I'm a good man. And he wondered if everything was going to be okay. Remember the 3 Hebrew children, as we sometimes refer to them. They weren't actually children, they were grown men. Daniel chapter 3, when Nebuchadnezzar had made a decree that if anybody bowed down, they're only to bow down to his golden image, and these 3 refused. And thus, after having another chance, they still refused, so they were cast into the superheated furnace. And as they begin to tumble down into that, it's like, what are they thinking? How are we going to get out of this? Not too long after, Daniel, as recorded in Daniel chapter 6. A decree was made by King Darius. You pray only to me. And Daniel was not going to do that. He prayed to God 3 times every day. And even when he heard the decree that anyone who prayed to any god but him would be cast into the den of lions, he did so publicly in front of his window, as he typically did. He was found, accused, thrown into those den of lions. I've never been real close to a lion, but I did attend a circus back, I think, in my 20s, in which they had the lion tamer. And I was sitting very close, and I mean that lion, close, I mean maybe 30 feet away from the cage. And just that lion, the way it growled and roared, it scared me. And he's thrown into a den of hungry lions, and he's wondering, how is this going to work out? Well, just a few more examples from the New Testament. The apostles were in a couple of dangerous situations where they had to wonder the same thing. In Mark chapter 4, they're sailing across the Sea of Galilee. Verse 37, however, tells us that during that trip, a great windstorm arose and the waves beat into the boat, so it was already filling. And they woke up Jesus, who was sleeping. And essentially they said, this is not okay. We're going to drown. They were worried. Turn now to the book of Acts chapter 12. The Apostle Peter, during the days of Jesus, and especially during the time Jesus was betrayed, he had some tough moments when he denied Jesus. But listen to this. Most of us know the story, but we don't think about how apprehensive Peter had to be at the time. Acts chapter 12, I'll start reading at verse 1. Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. Now he killed James. This is James the apostle, the brother of John, with a sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. And evidently Peter knew what had happened to James. And now he's arrested by the same king. So he knows what's coming. So it was during the days of unleavened bread. So when he had arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered to him 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, because a man who knows he's going to die needs to be guarded carefully, intending to bring him before the people after the Passover, where he would judge him guilty and take off his head as well. So Peter, in that jail, I mean, he has all the faith in the world in Jesus Christ, but again, this is not what he expected. He expected to spend the rest of his life, as long as it was, preaching the gospel. This would cut it short. One other example. The great apostle Paul. In Acts chapter 23, Paul was in Roman custody in Jerusalem. There had been a riot surrounding him, and he was held in custody until the commander of the Roman forces there could determine why the Jews were so dead set about killing this man. So I'm reading verses 12 and 13, Acts 23. When it was day, while he's in custody, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves with an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. So they're going to assassinate the Apostle Paul. They're going to set up an ambush. Now, when they make that vow, it's a death vow. It essentially says either he dies or we're going to die, because we won't eat or drink until he's dead. I don't know how many carried through with that part. But we read in verse 16, so when Paul's sister's son heard about the ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul's in a lot of trouble. He's been in trouble before. He's actually been rescued by his Christian brethren. But not quite like this. When these Jews make a vow, it's you or us. That's very serious. So I have to wonder if Paul was wondering, how is this going to work out? God brought me all this way to die in an ambush? Well, the good thing, as most of you know, God took care of every one of those just mentioned. He made everything okay. Elijah's life was not only spared, but he went on to do some of his greatest work as a prophet and was taken up into heaven in a whirlwind by the power of God. Abraham's son, that he thought he was going to stick a dagger into his heart or cut his throat, was spared by the providence of God. Joseph was not only freed from prison, but became the second most powerful man on planet Earth at that point in time in history. God allowed Moses to part the Red Sea, where the Israelites escaped, and in the process of doing so, killed virtually the entire army of Egypt. God helped Joshua expose the sin of Achan that prevented Israel from taking Ai. When they went into Jericho, Achan saw some valuables. Everything in Ai of a value was to be devoted by Israel to God. But Achan saw some things he wanted for himself, so he took them and he hid them in his tent. And that's why God would not allow them to take Ai. And when Joshua exposed the sin and the sinner, then they continued in great conquest. Job ended up with twice as many possessions that he'd had previously, and was given as many new children as he'd had previously. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not even singed in the flames. Daniel, with the help of an angel, essentially made pets of those hungry lions. Jesus stilled the storm for the disciples. Peter was rescued by an angel. Paul was delivered, and he was several times, from danger when he had to wonder about that ambush plan for him. In Romans chapter 15, verse 4, we read, "Whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope." Listen, like Elijah and all the rest, there are times where we wonder if everything's going to be okay. And we need some reassurance. Like today. The attempted assassination of former President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, left millions of Americans wondering if everything's going to be okay, if there'll be more assassination attempts, or whatever. And by the way, had it been just for one movement of former President Trump's head, he would be dead today. As tragic as it was, because a person was killed and two were critically injured, everything would be different had he died yesterday. Just understand it. And by the way, please pray for the family of the one who lost his life. Just an innocent supporter there at the rally, and the two that were critically injured, and for our former president. That said, when things like this occur, we do need to remember those examples from the Bible, because with God's help, for us, I emphasize that, for Christians, everything will be okay. God will work everything out for good. That's what He promised. Romans 8:28, does that ring a bell? All things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. One of my favorite verses, and I appreciate Lester sharing, from Psalms 37:23 and following. "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. He delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. I have been young, and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed, his descendants, begging bread." I close this lesson with this. Jesus knew, as Christians, just like the world, many of the struggles of the world will be our struggles as well. Sometimes we will face struggles that the world doesn't. But no matter what, Jesus left His followers and us with this promise. John 16 and verse 33. "These things I have spoken to you, that in me, in Jesus, you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." You follow me, you will too. 1 John 5 verse 4. "Whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and in this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith." If anybody needs to respond to the invitation today, who needs our prayers, or if you're willing and ready to obey the gospel today, we'd be so happy to hear your confession, to baptize you into Jesus Christ for the remission of your sins. If you need to respond, would you come up, have a seat up here, as those of us who are able to do so stand and sing the song together.